What's up, fellow gamers? It's your boy Phreak. That was a good intro. Either way, 9.5 is upon us. I realized when the patch notes came out, I had not done any prep for this, and so I did it all, and now it's all fresh in my mind. Let's talk about patch 9.5. I quite like this patch. I think there's a lot of good changes in it. There's always going to be naysayers who are like, why didn't you do X? But I think it's a good patch. So 9.5 has some cool stuff. All right, Kale and Morgana reworks are coming out. Morgana is mostly just a new model update with sounds and everything else. That's pretty sweet looking. Kale is a full update. She is going to be hot garbage in lane, but scale amazingly. Should be a fun champion. Looks pretty cool. As far as actual changes to champions that we know and can sort of tabulate, let's talk about Akali, who obviously got hit really, really hard a couple patches ago. Interesting though, she's actually a fairly reasonable top laner. She's at 46% top lane, which honestly is way better than I expected coming out of that patch. So she doesn't need that large of nerfs to be usable in some roles. Or sorry, that large of buffs to be usable in some roles. So getting some movement speed buffs on this, which is pretty nice on the passive, going in and out. Twilight Shroud gives her max duration just by going in and out once. That's pretty cool. Cooldown buff to the ultimate, damage buff to the E. Worth pointing out, you cannot get the second cast of damage without hitting the first cast of damage. You hit the same target twice. So even though this damage is down, it's only in compensation for this damage going up. And overall, her damage has in fact gone up. So here's Akali's E damage. If you just double tap it at the start, it still does 120, but later on it does quite a bit more, up to plus 20 damage. Do want to point out that rank 1 of the ability, if you only throw the shuriken and don't follow through, you are still getting a damage buff. I didn't include that in the chart here, but it's 10 to 30 bonus damage if you press E and leave it, and it's 0 to 20 bonus damage if you press E and come back. Now this does give you some level incentive, especially if you're only hitting E1. 10 to then 30 more damage is pretty nice. That said, the win rate difference on Emax under Wmax is 3.5%. I don't think this is enough to suddenly make you go Emax second, but maybe it gets a little bit closer because some people were doing Emax second. This will still raise her win rate. Even if they're doing suboptimal builds, that gets less suboptimal. So overall, pretty solid buff to the champion. E is a pretty skill testing ability. You've got to land it. So hey, that seems kind of nice. The cooldown buff to perfect execution is a simple 20 to 10 second cooldown buff, which is a solid about 15%, which is pretty meaningful and is her main mobility tool in actual fights. So that seems pretty solid. I'm generally a fan of assassins having a roughly 1 minute long cooldowns on their ultimates. What I find interesting especially is AP assassins don't tend to have great access to CDR. I say that as though Luden's doesn't exist, but Akali doesn't build Luden's Echo, for example. So it can be a little bit weird being like Akali or Katarina and trying to find sources of cooldown reduction when you clearly want Sork Shoes. Whereas when you're like Talon, you're like, well, I don't have Sork Shoes, so cooldown boots, also Yomu's, also Duskblade, so I guess we're already at 30 before runes. So that's something I find kind of interesting, and I feel like that is something that at some point Riot can figure out ways to give good CDR progression to assassins because it exists on AD and not on AP. Either way, whatever. This is a pretty solid set of buffs. This is probably a good like 2.5%. No, I don't want to say 2.5%. It is probably close to 2% positive win rate. Overall in the champion, maybe 1.5%, but this puts Akali pretty close to not trolling in solo queue if you play it territory, which is good. So that's pretty cool. Next up, a pretty substantial buff to Neeko's root. I prepared this point in my head several times. It's honestly like almost too confusing to talk about old Neeko E and new Neeko E. What it comes down to is it simply roots for longer in almost all cases, and at worst the same amount. Basically. So it is a pretty much a strict buff. So here's, for example, let's say you're fighting a battle one-on-one. You're like in the river fighting Akali, and you hit them with E. That is unchanged. That is completely unchanged. Also, if you are fighting Lissandra in lane, and you toss your E through a minion line and hit her, that is also unchanged. the one-on-one combat scenarios across champions are almost always unchanged. The only difference in one-on-one scenarios is if you thread your E through a single minion, it used to require 2, now it requires 1. In that case, your root duration is stronger in one-on-one champion combat. Otherwise, the laning phase is not different. Here's the parts where it is different. Mass champion combat, and in case you really cared, mass minion combat. As long as your first target is not the only champion hit, your first target is rooted for quite a bit longer, right? 1.4 to 3x as much root duration. Also, if you are fighting several champions, then champions you hit that aren't the first champion hit and aren't the last champion hit, if that makes sense. Like, let's say I'm in a big team fight and I somehow get this miracle 5-person E. What it would do is just this for all of them. Now it does this for the first one, which we already talked about. But also now roots the rest of the champions in the middle for this, right? All your middle targets are getting this instead. Because the old Neeko E only ever did the 0.5 seconds, except for the single last champion hit, and everything else was 0.5 seconds. Now, only the first target is the short duration, and everything else is up to 3 seconds long. So you're going to get a lot of this happening, where you've got this substantial difference in root duration for a lot of your targets. For a team fight where you hit several champions, and as long as the E has been warmed up, you're getting this kind of gain. This is where the major benefit is. And then it was also possible, again, talking about threading your E through a single minion, then hitting a champion. Through a single minion, then hitting a champion, this is the difference. You get this buff here. But that is the only case where this like data chart matters, is through a single minion, then hitting a champion. Or similarly, yeah, basically that. So, okay. Because the middle duration is only last champion hit, or the empowered against last champion hit. Yep. Okay. So that's pretty substantial. They are intending this, by the way, to be a buff towards support Neeko. Support Neeko is a role she's being played in, but it's her worst role. I've actually seen Neeko played in literally all 5 roles. We've seen top lane Neeko in LCS. I played against an attack speed on hit Neeko recently in solo queue, who transitioned pretty well. Obviously, we've seen her as a mid laner support, even has some bot lane play, and I used to play her in the jungle even. So has a lot of roles. I think she can legit be played in all 5 roles. These are buffs to Emax roles, especially, which is mostly support. Next up is a buff to Rakan, and it's pretty substantial. It's 0 to 20 damage up on the W, and a decent amount of extra dash speed on that ability as well. Keep in mind that got updated a couple of patches ago. One thing I want to point out, actually, is Rakan's highest win rate build in solo queue is actually W max first. And with these changes, I think we're all going to see W max first, and that will be, we'll go back to that being the primary build. A solid 8% damage gain is nothing to scoff at. It definitely matters. Plus 20 damage is certainly relevant. It's also quite a bit faster overall, 7% in the early game, only 1% in the end game, but still, this is fairly meaningful. This is basically a slew of small-scale buffs. This is probably about 1%, maybe 2% with builds getting better, because people are going to max the abilities maybe more correctly. This is a 1 to 2% win rate buff. Rakan definitely needs it. He's certainly in a pretty weak spot overall. So good to see this happening. Good to see Rakan out there. Next up, stuff to Skarner and Captain Flowers is over the moon about this. You no longer get the intruder alarm. The spires don't appear on the minimap and tell you that Skarner is there. The spires now also cover Krugs and Raptors. That's a pretty big deal as well. Oh my word, this is great. I think it was already in Raptors, but now it's also Krugs. That's specifically what it was, because it was on the other side of red buff and did Raptors red. Now it does Raptors red and Krugs. So that's really, really big deal. Skarner would love to kill Krugs, even though he's a physical damage champion. He's very repeated damage AoE. Yeah, really good stuff for him. He's going to gain probably a lot for this. It's going to take some getting used to. Like, people are going to have to learn, like, the right times to do Krugs or whatever, but this is actually really substantial. We might even see Skarner back in Pro. Captain Flower is certainly going to be happy. So are the other 4 Skarner mains in the world. This is cool stuff. Next up, a big update to Vi. And this is kind of interesting. So Vi is basically becoming more of a, like, I think Vi is, in a class, she is a diver. Her point is to go reach a champion and do the thing. Get to the target, set up the target, let's go. To support this, she is going less towards burst assassin one-shot you like she's Talon, and more towards I'm going to start the dive, let's all follow through like she's Kled. And I think that is a good thing, personally. I thought Vi having point and click hard CC from 1,000 ranged into full combo you one-shot was a fairly frustrating playstyle that you often didn't have counterplay against, so I'm kind of glad that we are seeing the AD ratios go down and her consistency otherwise go up. So here's the big change. Okay, so her attack speed growth goes down by 0.5 per level, which eventually ends up at about 9% less attack speed, but her denting blows gains up to 10% more attack speed. So as long as you max W second, you're more or less catching up with this. It's getting pretty close. Her shield is 50% stronger, but has a 50% longer cooldown. That said, you can revert that by ever triggering denting blows, which means, of course, you're going to do this. Thus, your ratio is just higher, and the cooldown is probably just strictly better in almost all cases. Okay, so you have better shielding for sure. Your attack speed is sometimes worse, sometimes better. But it does ask you to max W second. That's relevant. Q has a lower bonus AD ratio, but it does full damage to monsters and minions, which is actually pretty relevant. So that's a jungle clear speed buff in basically all cases. This is a jungle buff as well. Sorry, this is a jungle buff as well. Her E is definitely a little bit weaker, but like by the tiniest of margins, 0.05 AD ratio, it means basically nothing. Okay, so still lower ratios, more shielding, attack speed's kind of a wash. Okay, we're keeping it in our minds so far. Then here's where the bigger changes are. 10 to 20 seconds longer on the ult cooldown, but she can easily access CDR, so not a big deal. 0 to 50 more damage in the ult, but 0.3 AD ratio lower is quite substantial. However, as she is a diver and is going to go click on Ashe or Tristana, deals full damage to their other targets, and has triple the CC duration on her other targets as well. And now I have seen changes like this where you're like a CC duration goes from useless to actually matters. This means more than you might think. Like when the Volibear E stopped blinks and like added a quarter-second stun, that ended up being a really big deal, actually. It ended up being a really substantial buff to the champion. Things like this will sneak up on you. This is actually a pretty meaningful CC duration increase. A half a second more stun on lots of targets is actually quite meaningful. So let's dig into the numbers a bit more specifically, okay? So assuming that she is indeed maxing W second, here is her attack speed chart. It goes down, up to like 2% in the sort of early to mid game, but is generally higher overall. I would consider this to be, I don't know, I guess it's technically a nerf for her jungle clear, but again, to the tune of like 2% attack speed, which is really not that meaningful. Also, this tabulation is wrong. This percentage graph is wrong because this is supposed to be 1+% divided by 1+%, not percent divided by percent. So the actual DPS loss is not 5%. It's like 1.25. So keep that in mind. This is a mistake here, and that's my bad. This is not nearly as red, nor nearly as green as you might expect. Okay, otherwise, though, here is her E damage with a 0.05 AD ratio nerf. It's like 6 damage at highest level. Not a big deal. The ratio is down 4%. Not a big deal. It matters, it exists, but really whatever. Like, really whatever. It doesn't matter. I'm not really sure why they added the AP ratio, but hey, good for them. It can crit. That's kind of cool too, but obviously Storm Razor is no longer the same item. But hey, I don't know, maybe you choose to buy IE and there's like a reason you care about this. Whatever. It doesn't really matter. The big thing, of course, is all the changes to the ultimates. Let's go into that. So there's a lot going on here. The ult cooldown is pretty substantially up, right? 9 to 33%. But again, this is still pretty much in usable territory where it's up every single team fight. There's going to be cases where you wish it was back up and it wasn't, but this is low enough where you're not going to like run out of uses on like a macro level. So I think this is not that big of a deal. As far as the damage is concerned, yeah, it's up a little bit, plus 50. Okay, great, whatever. Not all that massive. The ratio is down quite a bit. Of course, But the secondary target damage is up by almost 50%, and the secondary target CC is up 300%. That's definitely a pretty big deal. And ultimately, yeah, like, she's going to go punch through your team and go reach the carry in the back line. She is more durable, fairly similar DPS, definitely less of a warrior Triforce sort of champion, although I think she still has pretty good ratios overall. But she's going to lose damage in a warrior Triforce build. 0.05 here, 0.2 there, 0.3 here. This matters. This definitely matters. It definitely matters. But I mean, you're going to basically go W max second. You're going to go for a tankier build, and you're going to have good target access still, and you're going to be more towards durability on the diver end. Also want to point out, by the way, that Vi is ludicrously powerful right now. She is exceptionally, exceptionally strong. Her win rate is super high in the jungle, and if this was a strict power down, that would be good for League of Legends. I don't know if people haven't realized yet if Vi is really, really powerful. I'm actually going to look up real quick. Vi's data, because as a jungler, she is almost 53% win rate, and that's been true for a long time. Her pick rate has steadily climbed from 3% to about 4.5%, but her ban rate hasn't really gone much of anywhere. It's still very, very low. So people are learning that Vi is good. She is going up a little bit in popularity. People are figuring out this champion's quite good. She's not so good she's frustrating. Her ban rate is non-existent. But she is objectively powerful. Now, the weird thing is, I want to point out, just to kind of move on this topic a little bit longer, or stand at this topic a little bit longer, perception is more important than reality. If people think Vi is weak, or people aren't frustrated by Vi doesn't need to be nerfed. You only want to nerf Vi when people are frustrated by Vi or think she is too powerful. Otherwise, you're like, wait, why are we nerfing Vi? Because again, Vi is objectively very powerful. This is a fact. You cannot debate this. She is objectively powerful. But if the thought is, why are we nerfing Vi, that objective truth doesn't matter. Because all you care about is the satisfaction of the players of the game. I think, honestly, this will end up being powered down in the short term, because people are going to probably build her wrong and play her a bit incorrectly. W max last will be I think just assuredly wrong now. You have to max it second. That's going to be a fairly meaningful thing. You shouldn't be building Yomu's Ghostblade in this character, etc., etc. But I think this champion is totally playable, will remain above 50% win rate. This shielding buff is really massive. Like, denting blows bonus attack speed into reducing your cooldown on blast shield is a big deal. It really is. Okay, some cool audio updates to Lucian. That's pretty sweet. That's great stuff. Next up, a nerf to Relic Shield. Now, the difficult thing here is they are trying to balance pro versus solo queue. In pro play, they're making the guess that people just want to be topped off all the time, so they're basically making this not good against topped off targets. Spoiler alert, that's true. They are basically making the bet that in solo queue, you can do a more bottom-heavy healing, and it's okay. It'll work out all right. The difficulty, though, again, is in pro, we only see tank supports, and in solo queue, the best supports are all ranged. You have a vast disparity between solo queue power and solo queue actual power, because the win rates are here, and pro perceived power. Now, I don't know if pros are trying Sona and it's not working, or trying Nami and it's not working, or they simply think you can't play Sona and Nami. And, you know, there are parts of this that matter. Like, in the late game, you need to put wards down in pro play. Wards are less valuable in solo queue. Braum is better at putting wards down than Sona, because Braum doesn't get one-shot by LeBlanc. Sona does. And that's a difference in the actual state of the game, right? Wards matter more, ergo tanks matter more for mid-game to late-game warding. I don't know how you solve that problem. Maybe you have to increase ward dropping distance, but that has other knock-on effects like vision control becomes more useless because you can't brush bait. I don't know. But they're trying to take a stab at bridging the gap. This will not fix the problem. It will, in fact, be a power down to tank supports and Relic Shield overall in solo queue, but they're hoping it's more of a power down to tanks in pro play, and thus they can then just strictly buff those champions to bridge the gap. That's going to be my read, that in 2 patches, we're going to see several tank supports being buffed in strict power level. Let's see what happens. So here's the math. Here's the Relic Shield healing on Ezreal. If Ezreal's at 90% HP, and by the way, I chose that 1 through 6 is tier 1 Relic Shield, 7 through 12 is tier 2, 13 18 is tier 3. Here's how much healing he was getting before and after. Yeah, it's down a lot. A lot. A very healthy Ezreal is getting much, much less sustained. Now, obviously, if you're literally 100% health, this doesn't matter at all. But if you're missing 50 health, well, you're getting 10 less health back. Now, it's only 10 less health. Like, this is a little misleading because this is only 10 less health. Who cares? But considering that most bot lane marksmen have abysmal base health regen as of the, like, 8.8 or whatever nerfs, 8.10-ish. I don't even remember. Sorry. It was in the summer split. Whatever. Either way. And it continues to matter. If you're at high health, you're getting a lot less health back. If you're at low health, though, it's actually fine. If you are chunked down to an inch of your life and Ezreal's at 50 HP, it's the same. You're off by like 2 to 3 health in all these cases. Sometimes you're up like 6 or so. Like, this is pretty reasonable. This is pretty meaningful. Now, I will say, and this is, of course, using Ezreal as our example champion. Ezreal has pretty reasonable health growth. I will say that this is not counting runes. This is not counting items like Doran's Blade. In the real world, Ezreal has slightly more health than this, and thus the 2% missing health heal right here would mean more in the old build, but it's pretty close. So, and obviously if you're at like, half HP, it's still going to be more of a nerf than a buff, of course. Okay, now what about for Alistar? And by the way, for context, Ezreal is the most picked marksman in solo queue, and Alistar is the most picked Relic Shield user in solo queue. So these are my just options because they're literally the number 1 pick rate. So they're the most likely to be affected. Alistar, of course, similarly, nerfed quite heavily by only getting 15 health back when you would get like 43. A high HP Alistar is not getting very much health back from this. No one is surprised. A very, very low Alistar who executes, and paws these things down is pretty close, but right. Whereas Ezreal, it was still okay at level 4. For Alistar, it's already nerfed by level 3. And again, if you're at like half HP, it's still just always a nerf, right? It's closer to this than it is to this. So this is a strict power down to Relic Shield. Now, what it does do is it does push you towards upgrading as soon as possible. The faster you upgrade Relic Shield, the more healing you're getting. That scaling is pretty massive, right? It adds another 5 to 30 per rank. That's definitely pretty meaningful. So we're probably going to see tank supports really push towards going all the way up to make their laning phases a bit better. I can see that happening. That's going to be a likely knock-on effect here. They're going to be doing this instead of rushing, I don't know, a Zeke's or Redemption or whatever, Knight's Vow. That's there. Cool. Stormrazor, I'm not going to lie. I saw this and didn't bother doing the math. I think Stormrazor is still garbage. Stormrazor is still incredibly not gold efficient. At some point down the line, I'll probably look it up. But you're still choosing between this and like if you're in like a full 5-item build where boots plus 5 items and you've got 100% crit and you want to choose Stormrazor, you're choosing Stormrazor versus Lifesteal or Stormrazor versus Armor Pen, which feels bad. If you're not at 5 items, you're choosing this versus Critical Strike Chance, right? Like this could simply be a rapid fire cannon, and instead of 60 attack damage, it's 25 crit chance and range. Or it's instead of Static Shiv, in which case it's lightning bolts and 10% attack speed and 25 crit chance instead of range. Or you're like, you built Shiv and Rapid Fire, and you're like, all right, I want my Stormrazor to buff my like range and my lightning, and like maybe it's that good, but keep in mind that like getting 30% more lightning damage is about the same as critting about 30% more often for your lightning damage. Those are almost the same number. Okay, the 60 AD matters and whatnot. Like, there are cases, realistically, where Rapid Fire Shiv, i.e. into Stormrazor, will be a good build. It's probably possible now, but I'm very lukewarm on Stormrazor right now, and maybe I should be giving it more of a fair shake, but I think the item is still garbage. Good nerf to Aftershock. I'm actually glad, honestly, that Aftershock is keeping the damage and making the resists what they should be. I think this item definitely, or this rune lives in a good place where that duration is short, and it's very particular when you have the buff on. I think that's a good thing. I think this item, this rune still having some damage is useful, is good for the rune. We'll see. Next up, more nerfs to Conqueror. I actually kind of, to be honest, forgot to do math on how much damage this gives, but this is now just strictly a lot less damage than before. Absolutely the case. This probably moves it out of viability for any mage. When I last looked, there weren't any mages where Conqueror was optimal on them. It was just comparable. And now that it's losing some more of its power, I don't think there's a single mage that'll run Conqueror. That's kind of too bad, but that's just where it is. Conqueror does live in a good spot still for several fighters. Riven and Kled and whatnot will still feel pretty good about this. And overall, like, I don't know. A Conqueror, essentially, like what it comes down to is Conqueror is nerfed to a state where it is balanced. It is usable on its good users. Much like all of the Keystones, where Kleptomancy is good on its good users and not used on, I don't know, Jinx. Welcome to Keystones. They have pools of users. Good buffs to cut down. That's kind of nice. There are still some good cut down users out there, but this is going to be buffs to champions like Kled, buffs to champions like Tryndamere, and hey, feels good that cut down is... Sorry, I was thinking of Last Stand. Yeah, I'm glad that cut down's getting buffed. I'm glad that they're keeping up with this and making it more competitive with the other two. Sorry, I just like, my brain just went to Last Stand. All right, so now let's go to the next bucket of changes. And from what I can tell, this is basically the design team basically getting a printout of champions that are sub 50 win rate everywhere and not seen in pro and going like, well, they're not good in solo queue and they're not being played in pro, so we can always buff these champions. So here's the printout. Shogath, Dr. Mundo, Gangplank, Graves, Jhin, Nunu. Wait, no, Nunu's a nerf, sorry. Tryndamere, Silas is also different. York's also different. Okay, so let's go into this, right? A couple of simple buffs and then some champions that actually have some digging into. So Shogath, and I'll be honest, this nerf looks decent, then terrible, then decent. You're like, okay, so, I mean, 2 to 10 damage on the ability to max first. That's kind of cool. And to be clear, it's really more like 6 to 30 damage, the ability to max first, because you have 3 autos with this. Okay, 6 to 30 damage. That's kind of nice. Wait, doesn't this rely on you auto-attacking and do % health damage anyway? That answer is yes, but it's still not that garbage. It's still an okay 2 to 4% damage increase per auto-attack, which is not insane, but it's still 10 damage per auto-attack. It's not bad. It's a minor buff. It's like 1% to 0.5% win rate, but it exists. It's wave clear, it's trading power, it's team fight damage kind of. Yeah, it's strictly power. Next up is Dr. Mundo. And so this is going to be interesting because here's a quick did you know. Dr. Mundo's highest win rate builds in solo queue by far, and it's not even close, is Emax. Now that's probably because you're playing him into AP matchups. You're probably not playing Emax into Riven. You'd be playing Emax into Rumble. But if you do it already before these buffs, it's a really, really high win rate build. After these buffs, this is absurd. Mundo, okay, so I mean this very truthfully. If pros are not playing Mundo in 9.5 against AP top, they are trolling. This champion will become invincible very quickly in lane and is still a very abusive juggernaut. This champion can frontline for you, he can disrupt the enemy backline, and he can be invincible. When the enemy team is playing Ezreal and Kai'Sa, and they're running Lissandra mid with their like Cassiopeia top, play Mundo. We have viable AP junglers like Gragas and Elise, we have lots of AP top laners and mid laners running around, and we have magic damage bot laners like Ezreal and Kai'Sa who cannot go all the way physical. Mundo will be invincible in those games, and if you're not playing him, you're trolling. This champion is an insane counterpick against AP top. Oh my word. Next up is Gangplank. Gangplank is getting 20 to 0 bonus damage on Powder Keg. Of course, keep in mind, Powder Keg does usually get blown up with a basic attack, which of course pushes that damage through. And it also gets blown up with your Parlay, which also adds that damage in as well. So I took the most lenient version of the buff possible, which is assuming you are blowing up your barrel with a Q on your base AD and the Q bonus damage, it is still a pretty sizable. Obviously, you can't barrel plus Q at level 1, don't get me wrong, but it's still a pretty sizable 14% damage increase in the early game. Eventually, of course, scaling down to nothing, yes, of course. But Gangplank has a better early through mid game. Considering you can't max till level 13, you are definitely getting closer to those, okay, I damage the champions. Sorry, Wave Clear is not affected with E. This is only bonus damage to champions. It is only his trading. I want to make sure that that's very, very clear. This does not buff his Wave Clear. This is only when you hit an enemy champion with a barrel, but it's 20 bonus damage for the entire early landing phase until level 8. It is 20 bonus damage when you hit an enemy champion with a barrel. That can certainly matter. This is a reasonable buff to Gangplank. This by itself would be maybe 0.5% to 1% win rate. The bigger buff is really here. The magic damage on the ultimate is up pretty substantially. 420 becomes 480. That's a solid 15%. 1020 becomes 1200. That's a solid 15% as well. This is a pretty substantial buff. I forgot to put the ultimate damage in here. That's my bad, but it's about 15% in all cases. This definitely matters. That ult is really good. I'm excited to play some Gangplank next patch because I like playing Gangplank. I think he's a cool champion. And these are both pretty meaningful buffs. 50% more damage on the R, 20 more damage on the E and landing phase. This is pretty nice. This will, of course, affect how the other pieces work as well. The Death's Daughter deals damage based on what the wave deals, so that's going to go up 15%. The Hail of Rain, whatever, that's not the phrase. The increased barrage speed for late game team fighting, that's, of course, just going to strictly get buffed straight through this, so that matters, of course, as well. That's pretty nice. XD 3AD. Ultimately, the read is that Graves got hurt by the meta, with Storm Razor going away and everything else, so 3AD, congratulations, there you go, congrats, good for you. Next up is Jhin getting a 0.05 total attack damage ratio added to Dancing Grenade. Keep in mind, Jhin has extremely high attack damage, and here is the new damage up 3 to 10 as a result. The damage up 4 to 3%. It's kind of funny because like as he levels up, he has more AD, and thus the damage goes up, but then as he, anyway, whatever. Ratio is up a solid 13 to 7% as well. Overall, pretty meaningful. This matters to Jhin. Jhin will be stronger. I don't know if we're going to see people try him in Pro just yet. I think people are still happy to keep playing all the other crit marksmen right now, but could use the power-ups. That's kind of nice. 20 health and 0 to 40 healing off the Consume heal. Keep in mind that Consume is not full heal in champion combat. You lose about 1/5 of it, but still 20 flat health and 0 to 40 off the healing. Here is Nunu. 3 to 1%, not that meaningful. The healing down a fair bit is fairly meaningful. It is an ability max first. You will probably still max it first, but good changes. Next up is Tryndamere, who just gets a nice 0, 5, 10, 15% extra crit at later levels. Definitely, those are pretty big buffs to Tryndamere. Now you can, of course, only go for 2 items, IE plus Shiv, IE plus Phantom Dance, or whatever you want it to be. That's going to feel pretty solid. Good for Tryndamere. Go have fun. Yeah, I mean, the big thing is that you don't have to buy another crit item, right? You can simply stop it too, and that's just going to feel good. So that'll be really, really nice. That'll be really enjoyable. People are going to like that quite a lot. Next up is Sylas. Interesting to note that in solo queue for mid lane, his most common build is still W max first, though Q max is getting closer. Win rate wise, Q max is indeed his best build. So much like the previous patch, he is getting pushed towards, hey idiots, max Q first, stop maxing W. Now that the heal is only 20 per rank, we might even see W stuck at 1 point. Not sure it's going to happen. It's only a possibility, but we're going to start seeing Q into E a bit more when we were seeing Q into W. But if you're not Q maxing now, you are trolling. Q max on Sylas, and when you do it, you're going to be very, very, very powerful. Lower rank up, higher rank 1, higher AP ratio, higher damage ratio as well. They are, of course, trying to hurt tank Sylas. They are, of course, buffing AP Sylas. Here is the base healing, assuming you're maxing W second, which is already the optimal build in pro play. It is strictly buffed levels 1 through 9. At level 10, if you have 100 ability power, it's buffed anyway. That's probably not going to happen, but by endgame, getting to 300 is not that difficult. 100 AP at level 10 is actually pretty reasonable. I take that back. This is probably going to happen. 200 AP at level 12, probably not going to happen. It's pretty close, so okay, the endgame healing is slightly down until you get more ability power, which you will. 300 AP at 18 is pretty reasonable. Otherwise, the healing is strictly up or up because of the ratio. The damage ratio, of course, up 18% as well. are, I mean, this is strictly buffs to Qmax mid Sylas. I honestly expect Sylas to go up in win rate overall. I expect him to go up in presence in pro play. We're just going to see more and more Sylas. 9.5 is going to be a Sylas patch. Yeah. Sylas Zoe every game, basically. That's what I'm going to see. Next up is nerfs to Yorick's ultimate. And people are like, oh my god, 10 to 40, 0 or 10, 20, 40 became 0, 10. That's such a gigantic nerf. Oh my gosh. And then the 5 became 3%. He's been destroyed. No, he hasn't. I mean, she has been. We're talking about the maiden here, but no, it hasn't. So here's Yorick's maiden's base attack damage by ultimate rank. And of course, this does not count Yorick's bonus AD purchases, which come in at a 0.5 ratio. So, okay, down a bit. Don't get me wrong. The maiden's base attack does 40 instead of 50 damage. You know, it's minus 10. It matters. It's the same at 16 plus, but I mean, it's certainly an early to mid game nerf. Don't get me wrong, and it's true. It is. So, okay, her auto attack damage, and she attacks once per second, so her DPS is literally 41 instead of 51. All right, it exists, but do you care about a 10 DPS thing? I mean, maybe you do. The percent health proc triggers every 2 seconds after being consumed. And so I took the very, very generous line of reasoning, which was it was triggered literally every 2 seconds exactly on the dot, which is never realistic. So, you know, soften this towards this number in the real world. Right, notice that this is a bigger nerf than this. This is her auto attack DPS plus the percent health damage proc divided into DPS. And so what we've got here is a 25% damage nerf, 60% damage nerf, 5% damage nerf. And again, the more attack damage that Yorick buys, and the more imperfectly you trigger this ultimate, the less this nerf really exists. The damage is down. It's somewhat meaningful. But half the point of the maiden is that she summons ghouls, and those are still good. Yorick still has all the rest of his kit. That's still good. This is a nerf, but not a very large one. I'm going to say maybe 1.5% to Yorick. Not that big. Maybe less than that. I don't think this is a very, very big nerf. Also, keep in mind this only matters if he is laning alongside the maiden. If she is solo pushing, you only get the first half of it. There's a bug fix to Rek'Sai. That's good. AR Earth changes. It's being extended for another month, by the way, so the next 2 patches is going to have AR Earth inside of it. Burn decreased. That's good. Bunch of bug fixes. Now it affects Time Warp Tonic. That's nice. Whoops. I hope this is actually getting fixed, by the way, because if this is what I'm thinking of it was, where your auto attack kind of got canceled and didn't do anything, no, it's going to be something different. Either way. Yeah, so hey, some small bug fixes. Prestige Ari, Arclight Brand, Chromas from Morgana, Kaelin Brand. Pretty cool stuff. So, we're about 40 minutes in. Let's do the quick TLDR. TLDR 9.5. I think it's a good patch. Kaelin Morgana reworks are pretty sweet. Akali getting some decent E damage and some R cooldown will buff her maybe 1 to 2% overall and was a fairly viable top laner as a result. Neeko getting substantial buffs to E max for team fighting, but not really for laning phase, but her E max is really, really good in team fighting. Lots more rooting. This will be a substantial power up to the champion. Rakan should be doing W max, has extra damage on it as well as extra speed. Should mean a lot for the laning phase. Skarner getting some nice things where people can't map hack against him, and the Krugs are inside the Spire. That's really, really sweet. Vi basically being pushed a bit more towards tanky, less towards bursty. Overall, bigger shielding. W max second, lower AD ratios, but the ult is going to damage and CC secondary targets a bit more easily. Cool. Might be a power down overall, but I think it's going to require some build augments. A Relic Shield is pretty much strictly nerfed in most cases. When you're really, really, really low on health, it's not as bad. It's just as good, but you are not going to be topped off nearly as much. Definitely nerfs to Relic Shield. Stormrazor getting some extra buffs to attack damage and attack speed, but probably still a garbage item. I'm not sure it fits into any builds just yet. I actually would like to see Stormrazor have crit, to be honest. I would actually really like Stormrazor to have crit. If Stormrazor had crit, I would buy Stormrazor. Next up is Aftershock, which is a nice nerf to its resist duration. That's a good thing. Conqueror losing some extra attack damage and ability power is probably gone from all the mages. Still good on plenty of the fighters. Rek'Sai probably stops going Conqueror, though, and goes back to Halo Blades or Electrocute or Press the Attack. There's still going to be some top laners using it like Riven, though, that are going to be just fine. Conqueror buff Cut Down buff is nice. Very, very small Cho'Gath buff. Emax is first. It's okay. Mundo Emax is his best build, especially against AP. Gain Freelo. If anyone ever plays a magic damage top laner, play Mundo, Max E, gain Freelo. Very small buffs to Gangplank in lane. Decent buffs to Gangplank helping out team fights. That's pretty nice. He'll be pretty good. Graves going to gain 1% win rate or so with better jungle clearing. That's going to be nice. Jhin gaining a little bit of extra damage on the Q. Also a solid 1% win rate gain. That's going to be pretty nice. Nunu losing 20 health and 40 off the heal because he maxed it first is good because he is the best jungler in the game right now and worth nerfing, at least in solo queue. Tryndamere getting 0, 5, 10, 15% more crit is quite meaningful. Tryndamere is going to gain a lot of power out of this, and he should be split pushing to impunity. Silas should definitely be Q-maxing. Leave W at 1 point. W second might still be okay. I'm not sure. But it's now, I think, debatable between W and E. E was certainly not the correct second choice in present day. It might be now. After the changes, we'll see. Either way, also it is a nerf to tank Silas because obviously less healing is not good for tanks, but bonus AP ratio is good for ability power. This is actually more pro-focused, but solo Q definitely AP Q max is great. Small nerfs, these are smaller than they look on paper. Small nerfs to Yorick's Maiden's damage when dueling alongside her. Yorick could use the nerfs, that's a good thing. Good to see Yorick go down in priority. Talking about a bug fix that happened to Rek'Sai. Overall, yep, that's the patch. I thought it was a good patch. Let me know how you think it was for you. Let me know how you thought about this rundown. I think it's a good patch. We'll see you in 9.6. And at some point, I will actually record what I was going to record about part 2 of base items. Base stats. I'm getting there. I think I have my thoughts in order. We'll see.